Hello, today we're going to work on a PROG die. We're going to take an existing supplied strip layout, bring it into a new design file, and we're going to start modeling the die around it. So let's get moving. Here's the strip layout demo file that was supplied by the customer, and I've gone ahead and created a new design to put this file into. So now, one of the ways we can do this, we can take this entire strip layout and we can copy it, and we can go to the new file and we can paste it. You can see that the file has been overlaid into the new design. If you look at the type of icon beside this strip layout demo file in the model tree, you'll see that it is actually an external reference. So this is directly referencing the separate file. Anything that we do to modify this file will get saved to it, even if we're working in this design. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this, go to source, and I'm going to say use internal copy, because I would like the designs strip layout, in case I modify it, to be saved as a separate entity from the original. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to create the die set. So we're going to start by going into sketch mode, and we're just going to sketch right on top of the strip layout. We're going to use a rectangle, and we're going to define the rectangle from center. We're going to pick the origin. Now we've got something that's symmetrical. Not really too worried about the size of it at this point. We're going back to 3D. Now we've got a surface that was created from that. We're going to move this surface down, and we want this to be an accurate dimension from the underside of the strip layout. So we're going to pick this arrow and choose the ruler command, pick the bottom of the strip layout, and now we can see basically how far we can move this thing, and then we can come up with a good whole number. So if we were to go right to the bottom of the part, we would be at 3.5. Let's drop this thing down to about 4 inches. So now we're exactly 4 inches from the bottom of the strip layout, and we're going to go ahead and press the P key for pull and pick this surface, and we're going to go say 2.9 inches thick. And now we have our die shoe. You can see there's a solid in the model tree. We're going to right click on that and say move to new component, and we're going to call that lower die shoe. The naming I'm using is obviously just a generic naming system, because you're obviously designing for different customers. You're going to be using whatever format and standard that they want to use. So this die set is not exactly the correct size for what we need it to be, so we're going to use the pull command, and we're going to do a dimension back to the cutoff, maybe leave 2 inches there, and we're going to pick this side and do a dimension to the edge of the part, and let's make that about 8 inches for now. And we're going to do the same thing on this side, and we're going to make that 8 inches. And then we want this to be from the edge of the cutoff. We want about 1.5 inches for cutting section, plus 12 inches for the stock guides. So that would be 13.5 inches there. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to pick the end of this strip, and we're going to move it up to that edge as well. Now, just to show what I did there again, I picked the edge at the end of the strip with a window, and I'm going to right click, and I have the option to go up to. So I'm going to go up to the end of my die. So now I'm a lot closer to having this the right size. It looks like it might actually be still a little bit narrow, but I'll figure that out after. That's the best part about this software, is that you can make changes as you go. I'm going to triple click this right now and go to display, and I'm going to pick a color more suitable for the boilerplate that this die shoe is going to be. So let's continue on by doing the trim yoke for the blanking stages at the beginning of the die. And also I'm going to select the bottom of the strip layout to start my my design, I'm going to go into plan view here. I'm also going to define a rectangle from center. I'm going to pick my origin, and I'm going to pick the edge of the strip here. Okay, now I'm going to move this back just by clicking on it and dragging it back kind of where I want it. I'm going to put it about there, maybe a little bit further back here. Okay, and I'm going to go back to 3D mode, and I'm going to pull this down up to the die set. So now I've got my plate that is going to hold all of my trim sections. I'm going to pick this side and add 2.5 inches to it, and pick this side and add 2.5 inches to it, all using the pull command. And now I've got my yoke. As you can see here, it's created another solid. Now if I leave these solids where they are and continue to create more solids, the solids will just join together and you'll end up with one big solid, which is why as I'm creating them, I'm right clicking on them and moving them to a new component. In this case, this is going to be the lower blanking yoke. And I'm going to set the color. This is also going to be boilerplate, so I'm going to make it that color there. So now that I've got that done, I'm going to move on to doing some of the trim sections. So now we can alternate between shaded mode and wireframe mode. I made shortcuts F5 I made for graphics shaded. I'll show you where that is right now. If you go to SpaceClaim options and you go to customize shortcuts, you can see that I've added F5 for shaded mode, F4 for wireframe mode, and I also made the A key activate component. And that just saves me having to right click all the time to activate a component, and I can go F4, F5, just hit those keys anytime I want to alternate between shading and wireframe mode. So before I go too much further, I'm going to take these two lower die components and I'm going to create another component, and I'm going to call it lower die. I'm going to move these two components just by clicking on the components and dragging them in to the lower die and expand that. So now you can see that I've got these components are in a lower die assembly. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create another new component, and I'm going to call it upper die, because the next logical step to creating these lower blanking trim sections is going to be actually to create the upper trim sections. So the easiest way to do that I've found is to activate the upper die assembly, which is anything that I copy is going to automatically move into that upper die assembly. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get a plan view of the end of the strip. I'm going to switch to wireframe mode, and I'm going to pick with a window all the top surfaces of these trims. As you can see, oh, it didn't do it. Get the plan view. So I'm going to pick them with the top level assembly activated. And you can see that you're getting a bit of a yellow shading there. Now they're picked. And I'm going to copy and paste, Control C, Control V. And I'm going to dump those into the upper die. And now I'm going to turn off my strip. Okay, with my strip turned off, now I've got these shaded, these are basically the top surfaces of the trim. And what I can do with these now is I can window them and pull. And I want my upper trims to be 100 millimeters. So I can punch in 100 millimeters. It recognizes the mm as a metric dimension when I punch it in, even though we're working in inches. And now I can window this entire thing, and set the color to my A2 tool steel. And if you look in the upper die, you can see that I've got all separate solids for each of these. So I can activate my upper die. I can pick all of these and say move each to new component. Now I've got all separate components for each of these trim sections. I'm going to select all those components. I'm going to right click on the top one and I'm going to rename. I'm going to call these upper blanking trim sections. And it's going to rename all of them to that, and it's going to put a little number beside each one so that we know that they're all there. So now that I've got my upper blanking trim sections figured out, I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of modifications here. I'm going to use the pull command, and you're noticing that I'm not activating and deactivating each component as I want to work on it. It's pretty intelligent as far as if I pick the surface of a part and I use the pull command, it knows that I want to modify that surface in that component. So I don't have to go and activate and deactivate each component to modify it. So as I'm going to take this component here and I'm going to add 1 inch to the width of this, because when I actually make my trim section, it's going to be bigger. So I've gone ahead and clicked it with the pull command, and I'm going to just type in 1 and press enter. 1 and press enter. And now I've got my thickness added to that. Now this is also going to have a foot on it. So I'm going to pull and I'm going to grab that edge. I'm going to go copy edge. And I'm going to pull this up, let's say 1.5 inches. Now what I've done is I've created a second region on this surface. And I'm going to take this region here and I'm going to pull this out, whatever is reasonable, 1.5, maybe 1.75 because we have to put a radius. And now I can click this edge here and I can say round and make that a 0.25 radius. And my first trim section on the top is basically done. It's ready to be screwed. So I can do the same thing on this side. So I'm going to pick this edge, pull it using the pull command. I can go up here and do the copy edge. I'm going to take this, I'm going to go up 1.5, 1.75, pick this, go back to radius, make that a 0.25, and now I've done the same modification to the other one. These are not symmetrical, so it's not like I could just mirror this over. Otherwise, I basically could do that. I could have taken this entire object here and mirrored it over to this side. That's a whole other thing to go over with you guys, because mirroring is a little bit of a different, it's a different way of doing things. So now that we've got the trim sections all figured out on the upper, we're going to turn that off. We're going to go back to the lower. We can turn the trim sections on. As you can see here, in the process of explaining this to you, I've obviously made a mistake on which side I'm going to put the foot for this section on. That's not a big deal. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to move this up to there. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. Just hit delete on that radius. I'm going to move this up to here. Okay, now I can take these two components. I can hide others. I'm going to go from the correct side this time. I'm going to grab this with the pull command, and I know that I was 1 3/4 in, so I'm going to take that, go 1.75, and I'm going to take this second region that I've created. I'm going to do a dimension from the bottom, and I'm going to go 1.5, because that basically was what we wanted in the first place. So now I'm going to go around this 0.25, this side here. I'm going to copy the edge. I'm going to go 1.75 again, and I'm going to do a dimension to the bottom, 1.5, and I'm going to put my radius on it, 0.25. So crisis averted. Now I'm going to go back and turn things on the way they were supposed to be. And So now you can see I've got trim sections that are entering into the lower yoke. Now, one of the nice things about this software is every time you go to do a sketch, it basically looks like you're creating a cross section when you go to do a sketch. So now that I've got these interfering with this, I can turn on the sketch and you actually can see an outline where, and that's usable geometry. If I want to be able to use it, I can actually use that geometry. So it just makes it a lot easier for you to see kind of what you're trying to do sometimes. And it also gives you working geometry that you can work to if you need to try and do something. So like in the case of this section here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a diagonal center line there so that I have something to create my sketch from. So now I can use the midpoint of that with a rectangle, define the rectangle from center, and I can create a section there. Now these parts here, I don't know 100% if they are symmetrical, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the same thing on this one. Rectangle, make sure I do it from center, and I've got my sections there. Sketch view. So I can do the same for these sections. I could put a little center line here, and then I could define a rectangle from center. And as you can see, I'm not overly concerned with the sizing of this right now. I just want to get this geometry in here because I can always change it after if I need to. Okay, I think that one's going to have to be a little bigger like that. Same thing here. This will give me a decent center line. And I'm going to define rectangle from center. Yeah, the customer may even want some of these to be done in a button. This one here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use edge. This is the use edge button here, or project to sketch. And I'm going to double click. So now if I turn off my upper die, you can see it's pulled that edge. Actually, that would be a lot more useful if I was actually cutting the trim into the cutting section. I don't really need that geometry right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this geometry that I use the edges of, and it created a few points. When you select, it will select the lines first. You have the opportunity to delete at that point, then you select again and you can select the points. So I'm going to go ahead and do a rectangle. Now this one I don't want to do a rectangle from center, so I'm basically going to go to a point and I'm going to press and release the shift key, and now I can track from a point. So I'll go maybe 1.25, and now I can start my rectangle there. And in this case here, I know I want to be about 1.5 from this edge, so I'm going to do the same thing from here, and I'm going to go minus 1.5, and I'm going to go about 2 inches there. That dimension's not as critical for me. So now I've got something there that I can work with, just so that I can show the mirroring functionality. You can mirror in a sketch. I'm going to pick the midpoint of that and put a center line so we have something to mirror across. And I'm going to pick that center line and I'm going to window this here and I'm going to mirror it over. Now obviously I need to modify this a little bit. So if I click on this line, you notice how this dimension lights up because that dimension controls the positioning of this line in the Y. So I could take that and I could bump it up to 4, and that way I can increase the size of the block that I'm going to use there. So the remaining pieces are probably going to be done with button inserts, so I'm not going to worry too much about those ones right now. I'm going to go ahead and resize this so that none of these blocks are actually touching each other at this point. I could have them touching each other actually, so just to be clear about that, I could move this. If I use the move command, can click on a line and press M to move. I can pick this. I can move up to there. I could pick this one, and I can move it up to there. It's not going to hurt anything. I didn't want you to get the impression that I was trying to keep them separate from each other for a specific reason. It wasn't. So now I'm going to move back to 3D mode. And as you can see, I've got a surface here. So I'm modeling everything with the top level assembly active. And I'm kind of, as I'm creating geometry, I'm dumping it into the sub assemblies. So like I'm going to do the same exact thing in this case here. So I've got this surface here, and I'm going to pull this, and I'm going to do no merge, and I'm going to turn off this other data here, and I'm going to pull this down, say 2 inches. Okay. Okay, so when I pulled that down, you saw that the blocks actually merged together here, the ones that we're touching. And the reason why that happened, I want to explain it to you instead of just fixing it behind the scenes. It happened because, I'll go ahead and undo that. You can see that it shows the surface as one grouped surface. They are separate entities in the surface, but it sees it as one grouped surface. Now if I take that surface and detach all, it's actually going to create separate surfaces for each one, and it will recognize them not as one big group anymore, but as separate surfaces that are more independent than they were originally. So now if I were to go pull and pick all these surfaces and say no merge and pull it down 2 inches, I'm going to get separate blocks for each one of these. And that's important because we don't want this to be part of this. We want that to be a separate block, even though it's kind of butted up tight against it. I'm going to clean this up a little bit and delete these curves. That was some construction geometry that I used to create this. Now these sections here are lower trim sections. So I'm going to go into the lower die, I'm going to activate it, and I'm going to pick all these sections and say move each to new component. And now I've got them all in there. And I'm going to go ahead, and they're all the same type of sections. So I'm going to right click on, pick them all, right click on the top one, select rename, and I'm going to call these lower blanking trim section. Kind of a long-winded name, but it describes what the section is. And it's gone ahead and it's renamed them all and given each one of them a number. So now these sections truly are independent from each other, and they're not in any danger of accidentally merging together. I'm going to right click, I'm going to window all of them, and I'm going to go into display and set them according to the type of material that we want them to be. Now when we go and turn the lower blanking yoke back on, we still have to cut for the sections into the lower blanking yoke. So the first thing we can do is we can go to the combine command. Now we've never used this command yet. So the combine command will allow you to add or remove blocks to each other. So if I were to combine, let's turn this lower yoke off for a quick second. We'll just do a quick little lesson on this. The lower blanking yoke off. If I were to combine this and hold the control in that, they would become one section. Now I can also combine by picking a section, and you can see the little picture of the saw. If I were to pick another section that interfered with it, then it would subtract. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to turn this lower blanking yoke on, and we're going to combine. We're going to pick this yoke. Now it's asking for the cutting components. We're just going to window all those components. And then we're going to window again because we want to select everything that gets subtracted. And now, if I turn all these sections off, we've got pockets where those sections were. So you can do quite a bit quickly with this software if you kind of have a good strategy in your head and know what you really want to do. Now, I really don't like the way these pockets are kind of, there's a tiny little gap there. This edge isn't really lined up with that edge. Not really great from a machining standpoint at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a plan view. And while you notice that I'm going into wireframe mode when I do this. And the reason why is because when you go to select items, it will select what it sees. So if I do that, it will select what it can see. And if I have wireframe mode turned on and I select, it's going to select the entire object because it can see the entire object. Now, that also means that when I select something like this, a wall, it's selecting all the surfaces involved. It's selecting the ends and the sides of the block, and it's selecting the inside of the pocket. So I'm going to window that, and I'm going to use the move command and move this up to that. Now they line up. Then I'm going to take this block and I'm going to move it up to that block. And what it actually did there when I did that, if you take a look at this, I'll turn these blanking sections off. It was smart enough to remove that wall between the two sections. So, kind of handy. So another great skill that we want to work on for this is we pretty much have to cut the trim line into these sections now. So if we turn on our upper, you can see that the sections interfere with the lower in a logical way. There's no reason why we can't use the geometry from these upper sections to basically cut the trim line into the lower sections. So we can pick these top surfaces of these trim punches, or we could have windowed the entire thing, but in this case we only want to pick specific ones. And we can do a copy and paste. Now we've got some surfaces that are located in our top level assembly. We can turn off the upper die. We can turn off pretty much the entire lower die so that we're just working with these sections here now. And this represents the trim line of the part. So I could put this trim line, I could just pull this trim line right through those trim sections, and that would basically provide the clearance that we need. One of the things that I want to do though is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move these to a new component. I'm going to call it trim. And then I'm going to make a copy of them back to the source folder, the top level assembly. I'm turning off the ones that are called trim. And now I'm going to pick one of these and I'm going to go to sketch mode. And as you can see, it's literally turned them all into a sketch. And the reason why it does that is because they're all at the same level in the assembly. They're not in subcomponents. They're all coplanar and they're all surfaces. So because of that, when I click sketch on one of them, it sees them all as a sketch. So what I want to do with this is I'm going to offset it because we need to offset for clearance for our yoke. And then we're going to do this again and we're going to offset for clearance for the die set. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on that with the offset command. Sorry, let's start at the beginning. Offset command, double click. Let's go 1/8 of an inch. Now it's left this highlighted after I type that number in. I'm going to hit delete because I don't need the original. I've got the original in another part. I'm going to do the same thing here. Double click, offset, 0.125, delete. Double click, offset, 0.125, delete. Double click, offset, 0.125, delete. Now with this one here, when I double clicked it the first time, it saw that there was basically two viable options here, and it decided to just pick the front face. Now if I hit escape and double click again, it's going to assume that the first double click that I did was not what I wanted. Now it's going to pick the entire chain. So now I can go 0.125. Oops, I accidentally forgot to hit delete. So I'm going to go ahead and double click and delete that. I'm going to go to this one, double click it, offset, double click. Oops, I'm not doing offset, I'm doing use edge. This is live TV, folks. 125, and I forgot to delete it. So I'm just going to double click and delete it. Offset again, double click. It's going to pick the first option, press escape, double click again, 0.125 and delete. Now I've got all my offsets. If I turn this on, you can see that I've got my first level offsets in there. So I'm going to go back to model mode, and now I've got a surface here. I'm going to move this to a new component. I'm going to call that offset 1, and I'm going to copy and paste, and now I've got another surface here. I'm going to do the same thing. Sketch, pick that, plan view, offset. I'm going to turn this other one off. Double click, 0.125, delete, double click, 0.125, delete, double click. It sees another option, so I got to do it twice. 0.125, delete, 0.125, delete, 0.125, delete, 0.125, delete. And now I'm going to go back to model mode. Okay, so now I've got my offset there for the third one. So let's just turn on the die shoe, because this is the clearance for the die shoe. We're going to pull this entire surface through the die shoe. There's our clearance for the die shoe done. Now we're going to go to the blanking yoke. We're going to turn on offset 1, and we're going to grab that entire surface, and we're going to pull it through the yoke with the minus. There. Now we've cleared the entire yoke. So I'm going to turn that. I'm going to go ahead and delete that, because now once I did that, it deleted the surface. And I'm going to turn trim on. And I'm going to turn on all my trim sections. Now, to cut these trim sections with the trim surface, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move the surfacing back to the lower level, or the top level, I should say. And anything below the top level, it will cut. Now, obviously, we've already cleared the back for the other surfaces, so this should just cut what you see. I'm going to go minus to make sure that we're cutting, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that through. And now we've got our trim set done. Easy peasy. Okay, so moving on, we're going to go ahead and turn off all those trim sections, and we're going to turn the strip layout back on for a minute. It's time to make the stock guides. So we're going to go ahead and pick the, just so you are aware, we are active at the top level. So like if I hit activate on any one of these, you can see it activates it. We're going to be activated at the top level. Same as what I've been doing before, creating all the geometry and then dumping it into the sub-assemblies as I go. I'm going to pick the top of surface of this die set, or sorry, of the yoke, and I'm going to sketch. So I'm sketching on the yoke, already at the correct height, and I'm going to go ahead and just make a rectangle here, and we want it to be 12 inches. If I tab, I can tab between the two dimensions. I'm going to make this 1.75, and that's going to be 12. So this is the stock guide minus the lip at the top of it. And the lift for this die is going to be about 1.25 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull this up, and then I'm going to do a dimension to the top of the strip. And I want to make this 1.25 plus about 1/4 inch gap, and that gives me 1.5 inches from the top of the strip. Okay, some customers would want that to be a nice round number, in which case we could go dimension down to the shoe and say, oh well, that could be 1.625. Now it's a nice round number. The other thing we're going to do now is we're going to pull this edge with copy edge, because we need to put 5/16 lip coming out the front of this. So we're going to pull that. And as we're pulling it, we're going to press the space bar. That's going to lock the dimension input. Now we can put 0.3125. And now we have basically copied this edge into a surface to make a lip. So we can pick this surface and that surface, and it's by default going to add material. We're going to add 0.375, and now we've created our lip. So now to do our lead, we're going to pick the edge, the corner of this. We're going to right click. Sorry, we're going to use the pull command. We're going to right click. We're going to go chamfer. We want to do about a 1/4 inch lead by 3/4. So we'll start by doing a 0.25 chamfer. Now as you can see, the chamfer turns into a chamfer with multiple arrows. So we can pick the back arrow and we can change that number to 0.75. So now we got a 1/4 by a 3/4 lead on there. Now if you're dealing with some other customers, some of them want to lead in both directions. We're going to do the same thing here. We're going to go say 0.125, and we're going to take this arrow and we're going to go up to our other edge. So now we've got a lead in both directions. That is basically what the customer is asking for. Now, when you do the stock guides, a lot of times you're going to have an adjustable stock guide and a stock guide that is not adjustable. Sometimes the customer wants you to make them identical and just put dowel holes on one side. It doesn't matter. In this case, we're going to make one side adjustable, one side not adjustable. But the geometry of the stock guide before we start putting holes in it is exactly the same. So we're going to go ahead, before we even create a component for this, we're going to go ahead and mirror this. So one thing that I find useful when we're doing a design, at some point it helps to create a mid-plane. So we know that this is the middle of the die. This coordinate system is the middle of the die. Everything is symmetrical from that coordinate system. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to make a plane, and we're going to pick the y-axis. That puts a plane right down the middle of the die. Now just to double check, we're going to measure. Okay, so E, the letter E on the keyboard, if you press it, brings up the measuring tool. And we're going to, it looks like a little vernier caliper. We're going to pick this, and we're also going to pick hold and control, and we're going to pick that. So now we're at 7.205 on that side. Now we're going to do the same thing on this side. We're going to pick it and pick that edge. We're 7.205. So we are symmetrical. So what I want to do now is I'm going to take this geometry that I created for this stock guide, and I'm going to mirror it over to the other side. So I'm using the same mirror command that I used in the sketch, but when you use it in the model, you get different options. So I'm going to pick this mirror plane, and you notice in the options here it says merge mirrored objects and create mirror relationships. Extremely important that we're going to uncheck both of these, because we don't want this mirrored object merged to anything, and we don't want them to be having a relationship with each other, because that basically means if we modify one of them, it's going to modify both. We don't want to do that. We want to keep everything as independent as possible, which is going to make it a lot easier to make changes down the road. So I'm going to go ahead and triple click this, or I don't even need to triple click it. Now that I picked the plane, I move the cursor over it, it gives me a preview. So I'm going to pick that. Now one thing you got to be careful about in mirror mode is it stays in mirror mode when you're done. So you start picking other things, you're going to be mirroring stuff left and right. You got to make sure after you do the mirror to go up and click select to cancel the command. Now we've got two solids that are mirrored. They are independent of each other. So we don't have to worry about modifying one and it's going to affect the other one. And these two blocks are going to belong in the lower die. So we're going to right click on the lower die. We're going to right click on the lower die this time, and we're going to activate component. Now we can pick these two components and we can say move each to a new component. Now because we activated lower die, when we do this, they're going to move to subcomponents of the lower die. So you can see there in the lower die we've got subcomponents, and in those subcomponents are now part of the lower die subassembly. Now we know that both of these are stock guides, so we're going to click on them and we're going to right click and rename, and we're going to call them lower stock guide 1 and 2. And they're completely separate and independent. Now we can pick the solids here, or we could triple click the solids on the screen. There's a few different ways we could pick them, but we want them to be the correct color for the material. Now, as you notice, as I'm modeling this, I'm classifying every component by color as I go. And that's really important, because when you get to the bill of materials stage of this die, you need to define what each component is as material so that the bill of materials stock list will show that material correctly. So what I'm doing here by putting these colors on, I'm giving myself a way to filter these components at the end and then select them in large groups, and I can basically go into the properties and set the material for them at that point. Let's move on to the first form stage and see what we can come up with here for this. So I'm leaving the strip layout on. I've got the demo model top level assembly activated. We can go ahead and rename this plane that we created. We're going to keep this plane. We're going to call it mid plane. That way we have it. But we can go ahead and turn that plane off. Now we're going to pick this surface of the die set, and we're going to go into design, and we're going to start another rectangle. So we want to have a section that is going to work for this first form stage. So let's do a rectangle from the center, and we're going to come out, and we're going to be 7.5 inches. 7.5 by maybe 5 inches. Now this is not in the middle of the part, so we're going to fix that in a second. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull this up, return to 3D mode, pick it. We're going to pull this up. We want it to be high enough that it encompasses the shape of the part, maybe 4.25 for a nice round number. As you can see, the part is so long, it's not going to give us enough room to have a foot. So we need to decide, are we going to just have this part stay between the flanges, or are we going to pocket into the shoe? I'm going to go ahead and pocket this into the shoe just to show you that option. During design reviews, you could end up having to change it, but that's the best part about this software, is it's easy to change things. We're going to go ahead and just go 1 inch deeper down into there. So now that we've got this block here, that is our form section, what we really need to do is we need to get the shape of the part onto this section so that it is usable as a form section. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to isolate, and you see how I'm drilling through here? Might as well explain these things as I go. So if you have the setting, select edge loops using mouse scroll wheel. Sorry, the setting is actually under navigation. If you have the setting zoom with mouse wheel at set to always, and in brackets here it says hold control to query select. That's the best option that I've found when I'm doing my work. If you have that option on, then you hold the control key down and roll the wheel. It will allow you to drill through the model to select different things. So in this case, we're going to pick this block, and we're going to pick the part that is inside of the block, and we're going to right click and hide others. So now what we've done is we've isolated the block and the part that's inside of the block. And the purpose of this is that we want to be able to take this block and move it to a new component. So let's activate our lower die. We're going to move to new component. We're going to call this lower form 1. We're going to make this block active. We're going to pick the inside surface and double click it. You can see what it does is it bleeds out all the tangency to the edges. So now we've picked the entire inside of the part, and we're going to do a copy and a paste. Now we've got a surface of that part inside of the lower form. Now any component that you create, you can right click and open in a new window. So I'm going to right click and open this component. It may show up on my other screen and I'll have to drag it over, but I want to show you this function. So we're going to right click and say open component. And no, it actually opened it up in this window. That's fine. And now we've got our component and we've got the surface that we need to use to cut the block with. So the first thing we want to do with this surface is we want to delete all the geometry that's going to prevent us from cutting the block with it. So let's turn the solid off, and we're going to double click all these and just start deleting them. So double click that and delete it, delete it. It's pretty fast and easy as far as that side of things goes. Oops, accidentally deleted the surface. Make sure I'm getting the edge. Okay, now I'm going to delete this geometry here, and I'm going to delete this geometry here on both sides. Okay, and then I'm going to delete these radiuses, and I'm going to delete as much of this as I can. Okay, so as you can see, I've still got a chamfer there, so I've got to pull this chamfer out to a square corner. It's pretty easy to do that. Pull these out to a square corner. And the next logical step is going to be to run this out beyond the edges of the block. So I'll start by doing the end. I'm going to pull that out the end of the block. I'm going to pull this out the end of the block. And then we want this to go down. We want to wipe past what? About 3 millimeters. So we're going to go 3 millimeters past plus, let's do this in millimeters, 3 millimeters plus another 1/4 inch for radius plus, that's probably enough right there. 3 millimeters past plus a 1/4 inch for radius plus whatever radius we're going to have on the top. We're going to have a 5 mil radius on the top. So let's do 5 millimeters here. You see how I'm putting the metric dimensions in brackets? That isolates them and converts them to inches before it does the math. And there you go. So now I've got my length of my thing. Now I didn't pick the other side. What am I going to do? I'm going to pull it down. I'm going to grab the arrow. I'm going to go up to. I'm going to pick this one. It's moving in a Cartesian coordinate system. So it's just going to move it in the direction that makes sense. So now that I've got that down, I still can't cut my solid with it because it's not completely running out the sides of the part. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this, and I'm going to grab the side arrow because now I can pull to the side, and I'm just going to go up to this edge here. Pick that and go up to that edge there. And now I can cut the solid with this. I could put radiuses in and get this even more finished if I wanted to, but I really don't need to. This is far enough along that I could cut the solid with it and I could add more features to it after. So I'm going to go to combine. I'm going to pick my solid. I'm going to pick the surface, and I'm going to delete. So, and I can leave that surface in there. I could use it to cut other geometry later down the road. I'm just going to leave it there because I don't really know what I want to do with it at this point. And I'm going to take these two edges here, and I'm going to pull those and make my 250 radius that we were talking about originally. So this is pretty thin here. Now in any mode, pretty much no matter what you do, you can grab any length, any line, and you'll notice at the bottom of the screen it'll give you the dimension. That's like a quick dimension. You could also do like a face to a face, and you'll get a quick dimension there. So that dimension there is not exactly what I'm hoping it to be. I need it to be more than an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and move this. Now you can see that the move is snapped to the bottom of the surface because I had it picked. And I'm going to do a dimension. I want at least 1.25 here so that I can put some 1/2 inch screws in there and still have 3/4 of an inch of meat underneath it. So Actually, in the case of this die, it'll probably be metric screws, so they'll be M12s. So let's close that. And now if I go back here, you can see that I've got my form section is basically created, and it's still not centered properly on this part. So I'm going to go ahead and triple click this thing, and I'm going to say move. Now, when I do that, the move orb automatically starts in the center of the volume of the part. So if you're looking at this part, you can see there's nothing sticking out, or there's nothing that's really in the way of making this find this exact center of the square. So I know that this orb is in the center of this rectangle, and up and down it's in the center of this silhouette, sideways as well as this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this by picking the red arrow, because I want to move it to the right, and I want it to be centered on the part surface. Now, the part surface, as you can see, the silhouette of the part surface is safely going to be a square as well. So I'm going to do up to, and I'm going to pick the top surface of the part. It's going to find the center middle of that surface, and it's going to line up to it. There, you see that? So now I'm dead center in the X to the part data, because I see that the surface that I picked goes in the extent to the end of the part. So that's another way that you can actually move geometry around quick and easy and move to the middle of something. So there's my geometry for my first form stage. So this is lower form 1. Now if I turn the lower die on again, let's turn that surface off. This is starting to get a little ridiculous how much we're going to pocket into the shoe here. And I don't think my customer is going to want me to pocket these into the shoe. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a plan view of this thing. And we're going to go to wireframe mode. Okay, we're going to turn our part on. And we're going to pick this geometry here. Triple click this die. We're going to move this orb to the top of the die set. And we're going to go up to the bottom of this form block. Okay, now you can see that the form is sitting on there. But what has it done? It hasn't moved anything else because we didn't tell it to. So we're going to go back to wireframe mode. And we're going to get a plan view from the end of the die. And we're going to window this geometry here to make sure we're at the top level when we do it. We're going to window this geometry here, and we're going to move it up to the top of the die. I could have did it all in one move if I wanted to. I could have windowed the entire die shoe and the bottom of this, but I wanted to show you kind of the process of it and the logistics of it a little bit there. So now we've gone ahead and made it so that our die is a little taller to accommodate this form section without having to pocket it in. Now we want to come up right up to the end of this form section with our yoke. So I'm going to pick this and pull it right up to there. Okay, maybe we'll back it off a little bit because we want to have a little bit of gap to the form section, so we're not going crazy trying to clear things here. Now let's triple click our form section, and we're going to make this the appropriate color for D2. Now we need to turn our strip layout back on. We've got a restrike. The restrike is basically going to be identical to the first form, but we're going to want to make it independent because it's going to have a different screw pattern. So what we can do here is another way we can take this geometry and move it into a new part independently is we can activate the lower die, activate component, or you could press A if you have the shortcut set, and we can create a component that's empty. We're going to call this lower form 2. Now that component automatically becomes active. We're going to triple click the geometry from the first form. We're going to do a move, and then we're going to hold the control key and click and drag the arrow. So what ends up happening there is it's making a copy of it. Now we know our progression is 7.5. So I'm going to go ahead and punch that in. And now it has made a copy in the second form, completely independent of the copy of the original. So we've created our second form simply by copying the geometry from the first form over to the second form. Okay, so now once you've seen that exercise showing how to copy the geometry from the first form to the second form, you can see here the second form doesn't actually match the first form shape-wise. So what we could do, we have a couple options here. We could delete this form shape. We could double click that form shape and we could basically delete it. And we could start over again. Or if we know how the form has been changed, we could just modify this to match what was already happening in the second form stage. So the first thing we would want to do in order to do that is, you can see here that we have to kind of analyze it a little bit. We could click on the front face of this block and we could go to design and activate a cross-section mode. So this is the cross-section mode. Now if we go display, we can clip the scene above the cross-section and it looks like a true cross-section. Now we're going to go ahead and hit this move grid. And we can move this and actually see where we're getting interference. So what was done here is in the first form stage, they're flanging down 20 thou wider and then wiping it tighter in the second form to allow the flange to come around. Because when you wipe this flange down, it's going to be sprung open. So by wiping it and then re-wiping it in a tighter, narrower width of the part, you're going to get that effect of continuing the radius around as you wipe. But what that's done to our form stage here is it's actually made it so it doesn't work for the second form. Now, in order to fix this, we can modify it right in our cross section. We can hit the move command and we can pick this surface and click the arrow and go up to, let's do it again here. Click the arrow and go up to our other geometry. And it's moved the radius accordingly to match. So we're going to do the same thing on this side. Move up to the geometry. And you can see our shape matches perfectly now. I'm going to go back to there. Now we've got these darts in here as well. What are we going to do with these darts? We've got a couple options. We could activate this part. We could triple or double click the inside of the existing part data, copy and paste it. Now we've got a surface. We can open up our lower form in a separate window. Okay, and our surface will cut the solid because it's matching everywhere else except for where the darts are. So if we were to go and design, combine, pick our block, pick our surface, we now can pick the geometry that we want to remove. And then we can just delete the surface because we don't need it anymore. And now we have a nice matching set of geometry without having to redo all the runoffs that we did originally. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to make our third stage here, which is the end cutoff. So we can go ahead and create a new block. So first thing we're going to do is activate the lower die, new component. We're going to call this lower cutoff yoke. It's going to hold a trim section. And then we're going to triple click this geometry and we're going to move it holding the control key. Oops, 7.5, not 7.52. And then we're going to hold control and we're going to move it again and go another 7.5. And we've got two solids in there. So now we can turn off everything but this. And we can combine these two blocks together because we're going to be trimming in between them. And we can move this back the appropriate amount See how it just automatically gets rid of that dart that was there, because it knows that if we move it in that direction like that, the dart would basically be eliminated. We're going to go back to the strip layout, and we're going to move this block all the way back till it's flush with the die set. And now we've got a yoke that we can put a trim section in to cut this little chunk out between the parts. So I'm going to triple click that, and I'm going to change to a cold rolled steel color. That's cold rolled steel there. And you know what? It turned out we didn't really need this surface here. So I'm not 100% sure if I want to keep it. I'm still going to leave it there because I think we could use it for the upper. So, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, basically showing you some skills for doing some PROG die design. And I'm going to continue with another video after I've modeled the top to show how to componentize the dies. Thanks.